I'm Richard Mouse, author of Faith Enterprise, uh, Making Mysteries and Miracles Vanish. Well, this is my second book. My first book I wrote about my childhood experience with polio, and the book was called Lucky One. And I wrote it after I retired, after I moved to Northfield here. Um, and I taught school for 30 years, math, physics, computers, things like that. Then we wanted to build a house with no steps, so we moved to Northfield to build that house with no steps. And that's when I wrote Lucky One, in fact. And then, I suppose 10 years later, I finished my second book, Faith Enterprise. It kind of resolved a lot of questions that popped up after my childhood, going to parochial schools, 14 years almost of parochial Catholic schools, and then my education in math and science and teaching science and math for close to 30 years. There's kind of a difference between those two worlds, and to reconcile that, or to what I guess I had my doubts about a lot of the religious things early on already, but I think I wanted to document it, see if I could document it, because just believing something is one thing, but being able to document it and show it with evidence, I thought would be very credible, and so I set out to do that. Had a lot of time.
And you've succeeded.
Thank you. I'm satisfied. Basically, I think I wrote about two books that deal with society's biggest scourges. One of them being polio, and the other one being the faith enterprise, or the religion. So.
It feels good to give birth to something new, and
I had read that writing a book or publishing a book is like having a puppy on a leash. It takes you places where you didn't expect to go. If you follow a dog on a leash, you'll, I think, get into a lot of strange places, and a book does that too. I met a lot of people and had a lot of interesting experiences.
There is a certain aspect of skepticism that one immediately encounters in the way that you present the book. How long would you say you were a skeptic, and if so, how long have you been a skeptic?
I thought about that a lot, and some people think being a skeptic is evil, that you don't believe anything, but that's not true. I became a skeptic, I think, at age 7 or 8, roughly. And if I could take just a minute to describe how that evolved, it was significant, I think. In both books, I mentioned the trauma of finding out about Santa Claus. For me, that was very traumatic. I cried. I literally bawled. And when my dad admitted, I went and told him that I heard in school that Santa Claus isn't real. And he then, this is in the first grade, and he then admitted, yeah, it's not. And I cried, and of course he assured me then that we'll still have presents, we'll still have Christmas, and my younger brothers and sisters, they don't know yet, so we got to keep this secret for a while yet. But I got through that okay. But after that, I was shocked that something I believed turned out to be untrue, that I had gone for some time. I should have known, I thought, reindeer don't fly. And I kicked myself and wondered, here I'm a 7-year-old, roughly 6, 7-year-old. How could have I believed that? I should have known that. So then in school, I'm in this parochial school with a nun in front of the room and talking about, Noah's Ark, I guess. Well, I should add one other thing happened before that. In the summer, between my first and second grade, I spent almost the whole summer trying to catch a live rabbit. Around the farm, we had a lot of cottontail rabbits. And I tried to catch one alive. I was trapping gophers and stuff, but I thought I wanted to catch a rabbit alive. And I never did catch it. One time I had it in a box and it chewed its way out. But I thought, and then didn't think too much of connect that yet with religion, but in the second grade, the teacher spent a lot of time talking about Noah's Ark. And she had these little cards, what they call them, holy cards, I guess, in school, showing Noah's Ark sitting up there on the hill, sun shining on it, and all these animals, 2 by 2, lined up to go on this Noah's Ark. And I looked at that and thought, And Noah and his family caught all these animals all over the world. And I was suspicious. I thought, it doesn't quite work that way. I had a hard time even catching a rabbit. And then these animals are standing there kind of in line like school children would line up to get a new book or something. And I thought, animals don't line up like that. I saw on the farm my dad and a truck driver try to load some young cattle onto a truck or hogs onto a truck to go to the stockyards. And it's quite a battle. They don't want to do that. Even trying to get a cow after being outside all summer into the barn in the fall is not an easy task. And that's just for a few domestic animals. Anyway, I became more skeptical. And then I thought about Noah's Ark might be a fairy tale. Somebody made that up because it doesn't work that way. At least I became a skeptic. And I did decide early on, and I remember this distinctly, realizing that I should pay close attention to what they're teaching me about religion, because maybe this is a story like Santa Claus, and I'm going to see if I can find something that could prove that it's true or prove that it's not true. I was skeptical at that point, and all my life through school, I became a math server. I took all the religion classes and argued with the teacher and pointed out things that didn't make sense, because I thought, I'm not going to let them pull that over on me again like they did with Santa Claus, when I should have known that reindeer don't fly. So if they give me a reindeer story, I'm not going to buy it. And I think that's what happened. It just finally coalesced into becoming atheistic toward religion, and realizing that between that and the Adam and Eve story, and just the more I read, the more I studied, the more I became convinced that it's all a scam.
So you mentioned theism. Would you say that you are an atheist then?
I think you can say I'm an atheist, yes. I just believe in one fewer gods than the Pope believes in. There are probably thousands of gods floating around, and the Pope is atheist toward all of them except one, and I just disbelieve one more God. So yes. Although I wrote in the last couple months ago about another God that maybe might have something to go for it. When you write something and you study the paragraph to see if there's any typos or mistakes in it, and you don't see them, and you might even pay an editor to look at it, and you don't see it. And finally you go print it and then read it, and there it is. It pops up. So I claim the God typos does that. It's like a miracle. A number of people look at it and don't see it, and after it's printed, bang, there it is. Now you see it. There might be a God typos that does stuff like that, but that's as far as I go with the gods. I try to stick with the rational world of evidence, which is, I think, much more convincing, much more safe, much more rational, I guess.
So would you say that your interest and your pursuit as an occupation, a profession of a teacher, and also in the sciences, that really, it does come out of that? I mean, you made that choice in part because of all of this, right?
That fell out of it just naturally. That science fit in, and I was interested in science at an early age because science is built on evidence, and science depends on evidence. And it has to rationally fit together. Stuff that doesn't rationally fit together either gets studied some more or thrown out. So I think I was led to that early on. By the time I was in the 9th grade already, I was hooked on science. And I'd read a lot. If we go back to my polio experience, I spent a lot of time in the hospital, and I did learn to read, and I liked libraries, I liked books. So my science, 9th grade physical science textbook, all about heat, light, sound, electricity, all the basic things in science, physics. By the second week, I had that book read already. 2 weeks into the class, I had the whole book read already. I liked it that much. It was so interesting. So I really liked that class. And so I think that just reinforced I made a motor, and it just kind of fell in place. I really liked it.
So you mentioned, obviously, you have had a deep interest, early interest in science, and you were exposed to all aspects of faith. So what's the difference between the two, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's pretty simple, actually. In faith, the definition of faith says to believe something without evidence. And even the Bibles and the Christians accept that definition. In fact, in the Bible, there's even a quote, I think it's John 20:26, where it goes something like this. Jesus said to him, Thomas, you have seen me, you have believed because you saw me. Blessed are those that don't see me and still believe. Even the Bible encourages to believe things that you don't see, which is the definition of faith. That's the dictionary and biblical definition of faith. Science, on the other hand, believes what you can show with evidence or rationally arrive at. We can arrive at the circumference of the sun, for example, without going there, but knowing a lot of geometry and some experimental evidence why we can determine how far away it is and the size of it. We don't have to be there, but we still have evidence. So science and faith are basically opposites, direct opposites. And in fact, another claim I often explain, and I did in my book also, every accident is an instance of the conflict between faith and science. An accident is defined as something that an event that occurred not the way you expected. You expected something to work one way, but the reality, if you had enough evidence, you should have been able to know that it was going to end up a different way. Certain things that might appear to be accidents, science or the insurance industry and the legal industry define as acts of God. If a meteorite comes down through the sky at 30,000 miles an hour and goes through your car and they call that an act of God. There's nothing you could do about it. But an accident is something that could have been avoided if you'd have had more evidence or used the evidence available. Another example I often use is you're supposed to learn the difference between faith and science as a youngster already when you learn to put on your shoes for the first time. You start out grabbing a shoe and just trying it, see if you got it on the right foot. And that's with no evidence, just kind of trial and error. I believe it'll go on this foot, so I try putting it on this foot. Eventually you learn pretty soon that you should look at the shoe and study it, looking at the evidence, and then rationally figure out which foot goes on. That's the science. Or another example that I use commonly is crossing the railroad tracks. You're taught to look both ways, look for trains. You don't drive up to the track and just say, oh, I believe there's no train coming, so I'll just keep on going. That's very dangerous. That's faith. If you, in fact, look for the evidence to see if there's no train coming, that's science. So they're direct opposites. And the world of science and mathematics tries to deal with that definition of science.
So in the pursuit of knowledge, you clearly are on the side of science.
You have to be. There's nothing been invented based on faith. It's just not there. It's out of touch with reality. You can't go far. You can believe anything you want, but if it's not connected with reality, if it's not connected with the evidence, it doesn't take you very far.
One of the things in your book that you say is that morality is bottom up rather than top down. What does that mean?
Morality, the religions would like you to believe that God and maybe the bishops and the ministers would like to explain to you what good morals are. What is morality? How you should behave? How you should live. I contend that, and I'm not alone on this, but I contend that the morality is actually bottom up. The people, the masses, determine what is moral, and that percolates upward, and eventually reaches the top and might change things. And a few examples of those could be, prohibition in this country. The churches led the movement toward prohibiting alcohol because they taught that it was bad, and I don't know where they found in the Bible or how their God told them that, but the churches pushed for making producing and drinking alcohol illegal. After the government did that, then they only discovered that the people, it wasn't their idea, the people wanted to keep drinking and making alcohol. And in my area where I grew up in central Minnesota, that was Stearns County, that was one of the hotbeds of illegal alcohol, whiskey making. Anyway, the government discovered that no, the people didn't think that that was a good idea to prohibit it, so they eliminated it again and got us back to where we could make alcohol and wine and beer and whiskey, and the people ruled. And then simple things like years ago, it was illegal to sell birth control items, even in a drugstore out in the open, and maybe it was illegal to sell them at all, but for a while at least it was illegal to sell them out in the open where the customer could get them. You had to ask the druggist for it. And it was all pushed by religions. Finally, we realized that it doesn't have to be that way. And that push came from the voters, the people. Minnesota is a good example. A few years ago, we had a constitutional amendment proposal to accept marriage, what did they call them? Gay marriages. And the Catholic Church spent almost $250,000 to fight that. But it was the voters that decided. The state gave the voters the right to decide that. And the Catholic Church and its bishops and God and whatever was literally trying to tell the people how it should be, and the people said to them, no, it's not. We're going to allow gay marriages. So there would be my best example of the people telling the bishop rather than the bishop telling the people. They literally had a fight of who's going to tell who, and the people won.
So bottom up rather than top down.
Bottom up. And also churches split bottom up also is another good proof of this whole concept. If everybody knows of some kind of church, whether it's a Lutheran or Catholic or Baptist church, that's split. And it's always the people that decide they're going to split. The minister or the bishop of that church never think it's a good idea to split. And all of a sudden you got two groups, each believing what they want to believe, and the church somehow survives it, but the people lead the way.
Thinking about the title of your book, Faith Enterprise. So how does that come into being, Faith Enterprise?
Faith Enterprise means a church, basically, all the churches, any church, any religion, let's say, is an enterprise based on faith, just like a lemonade stand is an enterprise based on selling lemonade. The churches sell faith. If you took away faith, they'd have nothing to carry them on. So they're an enterprise. Religions are an enterprise built on faith. They're selling faith.
A good point. Why was God's role a problem in the Adam and Eve story?
Okay. God did a number of, according to the Bible, and when I quote the Bible, I'm not quoting it because I'm endorsing it as a foundational document, but I'm quoting it because the people that take religion seriously believe it's a foundational document. So I'm talking kind of in their language. You need a number of miracles to make that story even somewhat plausible. For instance, the serpent that talked to Adam and Eve to sell them on the idea of eating the apple, for example. Somebody, if God created them just out of dirt or rib or whatever, one place in the Bible, in fact, it says dirt, another place it says rib. But God had to infuse these people with knowledge that ordinarily you pick up from your parents and your friends and your neighbors, your society around you. You're supporting the civilization around you. God had to supposedly teach Adam and Eve, or somehow let them instantly, miraculously know what is good, what is bad, what it means to do right, and basically that was another miracle. And I like to compare it to somebody holding the door and driving a getaway car for a bank robber. If you hold the door and you drive the car to facilitate this bank robbery, this event that we all agree was bad, but you somehow contributed to making it work, you end up going to jail too. Adam and Eve, God did some miracles to make this thing work, but supposedly God is omnibenevolent, is all good, and God facilitated this, made it possible. Without God doing those miracles, it couldn't have happened. The story of eating the apple and all that couldn't have happened. So in that way, I say that somehow God is the facilitator here of something bad that happens. God is kind of in the middle of making it work. So it just doesn't fit to me in my mind. It doesn't compute.
What about the New Testament of the Bible? When was that written?
The New Testament was created in 325 AD, 325 years after Jesus was born. Turns out that Constantine, the Roman emperor, this Catholic religion had grown up, evolved, split off from the Mithra religious belief. And there were scattered bishops around that part of the world, and they were kind of diverging a little bit. And so he figured to keep his empire together, it'd be a good idea if we got these bishops together and could unify this and make this all one consistent story. And they came with their Jesus stories and miracles and put it all together. And Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. So the New Testament was constructed basically over 3 centuries after Jesus was around. So there was a lot of time to pass the story on generation after generation, add things to it, embellish it, and that's basically when it got coagulated into what we call the Bible, the New Testament of the Bible.
Just a question that comes to my mind. In that period, 300, 350 AD, the development of science in the Western world was not very well. It was not very well developed, was it?
Not during that time, but before that already, the Greeks had made great progress in geometry and in mathematics and logic, philosophy. But when the religion became strong from about 300 or 400 AD till about 1400, a whole 1,000 years, when Catholicism basically ruled, at least in Mediterranean and European area, that just made the progress that the Greeks had come up with screeched to a halt. There was just a big gap. We call it the Dark Ages. That was when Catholicism ruled. And then finally science came back out of its recess, so to speak, around 1400, 1500, 1600, Age of Reason. Science came back. And since then, the religion has been fading. The faith has been fading out. It's been It's been a battle worldwide, millennia, thousands of years, this battle between science and faith. Which one is going to rule? And you can read articles in the paper today, in fact, that talk about that issue. All the religious people want you to ignore science, and the science people would prefer if you ignored religion. It's right at the core of the argument about evolution, for example.
So who do you think is a good audience, or who are you trying to reach with Faith Enterprise?
Oh, I guess I'd like to continue to teach about the advantages of science. In other words, let's make decisions, whether it's political decisions, whether it's personal decisions, financial decisions, base it on evidence, on rational thought, rather than just believing whatever the hell you want to believe. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You know, it's just make decisions based on evidence. I guess that's what I'm trying to promote. And it also, since the book has chapters on faith and science, the Bible, Christianity, Catholicism, I try to lay it all out. I make a good case for science and rational thought, and then I try to point out some problems with the Bible. I try to create some skeptics, I guess. Since the Catholic hierarchy has had close to 14 years at me, and it didn't stick very good. I'm trying to, in one chapter, I try to document what are the problems? What were some of the things that they were trying to get me to believe that I still can't believe? And this is why. And throughout these chapters, in the Bible chapter, I'm quoting the Bible. I'm not pulling this rabbit out of a hat or anything, or making stuff up. I'm quoting the Bible a lot. In the chapter on Catholicism, I'm quoting the Catholic Catechism, and quotes by the Pope, and the quotes by the Bishop, and the Vatican Information Service, and just laying out, here's what they say, you know. In our public schools, or in the Catholic private schools, they still believe in our teaching in canon law that they think the public should pay for their Catholic education.
So what if any, what are the benefits, if any, of these religions?
What are the benefits of religions?
Well, for example, don't religions make people more peaceable? Aren't they a force for good in that sense?
No, it's just kind of the opposite. It's just kind of the opposite. If you look at the United States, even, for example, the southern part of the country, compared to the northeast part of the country, the southern part is more religious and more conservative. The northeastern part of the country is more liberal and more non-religious, more secular. It's easy to determine, or easy to show the evidence that per person, the crime rate is way worse in the South than it is in the North. In other words, where the religions are supposedly dominant and supposedly a strong force influencing the people, the crime rate is worse than it is in the North. Per capita population for the state, there's more people in prisons in the southern states, in these conservative religious states, than there are in the North. And you can look at it on the world scene also, Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, all these countries are less religious than the United States even, and they have much lower crime rates. So I think just looking at the evidence, it's easy to show that places where religion is not taken so seriously, in fact, do better on the crime rates than the more serious religion.
I believe we say in the United States, one nation under God. What special things does the government do to aid and abet the religious forces in our society?
Even though the Constitution says that that we should keep religion, the government should stay out of religion and the religion should stay out of government, the First Amendment. the government does a lot of things that endorse religions, especially Christianity. In fact, nowadays they're in the news for trying to interfere with Muslim religion even in a negative way. But we have national holidays. In fact, National Prayer Day even, national holidays like Christmas. We have governments today beginning to want to push for more financial support for, say, Catholic private schools. I can't think of any more.
But there is in the land some pressure, again, I suppose from conservative forces, that would suggest that somehow we need to further aid and abet the distribution of religious thought and faith aspects in order to make a better society.
Absolutely. And in fact, another example I just thought of is 10 Commandments on courthouse lawns. And the Supreme Court is saying, no, you can't do that. The state cannot endorse any particular religions. If the state does something that all religions can benefit by, they can kind of get by. But if it's leaning toward one and favoring one over another, that's totally against the Constitution and fought for. So the state is supposed to stay out of it. In fact, that's why schools are prevented from teaching Bible classes, for example, public schools. The Supreme Court, I don't know, 70 or 80 years ago, decided that, no, you can teach about the Bible if you have a whole set of different religions, sacred books, and your course is teaching about sacred books, that's okay. But if you're letting somebody come in and distribute Bibles in your school, that is a sign that you're favoring one religion, and that is forbidden. So religions are still free to do what they want. It's just that the government is not supposed to be endorsing or supporting them.
The separation of church and state.
Exactly. That's what it is.
One of the interesting chapters in your book relates or tries to draw a relationship between baseball and the Catholic Church. That's an interesting parallel, if you will.
I think I've probably sold a few books with that already, because if you look at it, the Bible and the rule book, the baseball rule book and the Bible for religion, or you could say the Catholic Catechism, the Catechism and the Bible, or the cathedral and the stadium, or the Pope and the Commissioner, or the fact that you can't bring your own wine to either the stadium or the cathedral, okay? Or they both like organ music. I can go on and on. The chapter in the book has about 70 of these parallels. They're both very misogynistic. You got the bat boy and the altar boy. There's a couple differences too. In the cathedral, you pay after you go in, and in the ballpark, you pay before you go in. So there are a couple differences, and then the annual cycle of events, and the Hall of Fame, the saints and the Hall of Fame. It just goes on and on and on. They're both, and the only reason I spend so much time in this chapter talking about this is because a lot of Christians and Catholics argue that, well, Catholicism must be true, because how can 1 billion people be Catholic, and you're saying it's just a myth? Come on. You against 1 billion people? And the fact that baseball has 1 billion followers worldwide also, and it doesn't have any God connected with it at all. So you can have followers without being with or without God. One of them has God and one of them doesn't. So I'm saying the fact that one of them has 1 billion followers doesn't argue for the existence of God. It just argues that they've got quite an enterprise going.
One of the things that's always been somewhat humorous when I think about baseball is that there are rituals in baseball, for sure. But I know when someone a pitcher is not pitching well, his teammates will not sit next to him, because they feel that they might be picking up this bad vibration. You know, there's a lot of
Some supernatural
So-
phenomena going on
yeah,
there.
yeah, or a perfect game. A pitcher's doing a perfect game. You don't go close to them either because you might upset.
You don't
his-
want to mess up that whatever's going on there. Yeah, I didn't talk about that in here, but yeah, that's another. You can go. I think there's a lot of examples. I could have included if I'd have thought of them, but I finally got down to about 70 and ran with that.
Yeah, baseball is an organized religion.
In fact, I quote some judge somewhere that made that claim. I forget where it was, but a judge did make that claim.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's been a great privilege and pleasure talking with you today, Mr. Mouse. So all the best with your book, and I'm sure it will be a success.
I thank you, Paul. It was interesting, and have fun.
Good. Thank you.